Okay, so we're just going to briefly go through a couple of background questions. Can you tell us what your name was at birth?
No, I wasn't really conscious. I didn't know what was going on. You mean what name was on my birth certificate?
What name was on your birth
The
certificate?
name on my birth certificate is Henry Zuckerman. I was named for my grandfather, who was Henry Zuckerman. In between my grandfather and me, named Henry Zuckerman, but he died accidentally. So instead of becoming the third, I just became another Henry Zuckerman. My grandfather's nickname was always Buck. They called him Buck. There are different stories behind it. Theoretically, because he was a stockbroker and he spent a lot of time and made a lot of money bucking the market. I don't quite believe the story, but it's okay. So they gave me everything. They gave me his entire name and his nickname.
When did you change your name?
You mean legally?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't really. No, that's not true. I changed it in the 70s for two reasons. Because one, I was fairly well known as Buck Henry, and it got really confusing, like in foreign countries, showing my passport, which was a different name than they had booked me as. That and the fact that Zuckerman is at least 50% of the time a Jewish name. And it was in the days when they were hijacking planes and herding anyone they didn't like into the back and throwing them out. So just, as an extra margin of safety. And since everybody sort of knew my first two names, it was a logical procedure. In my time, of course, Zuckerman was a tricky name to put on a program. I haven't told this story to any camera, so here you go. This is a first. When I started out as an actor, I did a summer show on Cape Cod at one of the great famous summer theaters. For reasons that may become obvious, I won't tell you which theater it was. And there was a famous theatrical couple who ran the theater and often did the shows. I did a kids show. It's irrelevant what I did. The point of this story that I'm trying to tell is that the manager of the theater, and had been the manager for years, had a nice Jewish name, and he had to change it just as a name on the program so as not to offend the upright citizens of that part of Cape Cod. Did that make any sense?
Yeah, it did. I mean, so you dropped Zuckerman.
I dropped Zuckerman. I used it when I was acting for a while, for a number of years. All the shows I toured with and all of that stuff, up until the 70s, 60s or 70s.
So,
God, that was boring.
Okay, so we'll get to Life with Father and some of those touring things, but let's just back up and get some of those facts again. So your birth date, when you were born, and where you were born?
I was born, as far as I know, December 9th, 1930, and I don't know where. I mean, in Manhattan, I assume. I always thought I was born at Doctors Hospital because there was a story of my father commandeering a police car to get us there. But then I was reading something some years ago that said Doctors Hospital wasn't built until the 40s or 50s. So, and I have nobody to ask. So there you are. I might have been born in a cab on a street corner.
Well, you can probably create a better story than...
Oh, there's no question about that.
Okay, but we won't do that here. So if you could briefly just talk about your parents, what their names were and what they did.
My father, Paul S. Zuckerman, was a stockbroker, but he also was a military person. That is to say, he was in the Air Force whenever there was any reason to fly, which he loved doing. And my mother's name was Ruth Taylor, and she was an actress in silent films. I think she made one talkie, but she was mostly in films in the 20s, starting with Mack Sennett, dozens of 1- and 2-reelers, and then several features. The most famous of which was the original Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, but it's a lost film. There's no copy of it anywhere, I'm sorry to say.
So you never saw it?
I never saw it. I have stills from it, and they're fabulous. They make you want to see the film a lot.
Now, she, though, had left acting and the film world before you were born?
She quit when she got married, which was perilously close to when I was born.
Okay. Now, do you think, though, that her involvement in the theater, I assume she had a lot of her social life was still wrapped up in the theater. Did that influence you at all growing up?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Oh, sure. I mean, because my father was a theater lover and an actress lover, and so I grew up among theater and film people, writers and actors, and my father, I think, handled a lot of the film people's money. I know that, I think Actors Equity Fund, in fact, their money went through my father's firm on the market. So I was always around very strange people.
Was this something you felt you wanted to do or knew you wanted to do, was to be somehow involved in performing?
Yeah, I think I knew fairly early that I was interested in, I knew that I was interested in writing and I was interested in acting.
Mm-hmm. Were you considered a funny kid?
Yeah.
You did? Okay. I mean, was that your sort of role in the family? Were you kind of a clowner?
No, I don't think I was a clown. I was a wise guy.
Mm-hmm. And you had no brothers and sisters?
None to speak of, but I invented a brother and sister because I was lonely, or because I was just, trying to make people think twice. I invented a brother and sister who I was in Manhattan, living in Manhattan. I'm talking about when I was very little. And I invented this pair, and I gave them the names of Arthur and Hilda. God knows why. And Arthur and Hilda lived in New Jersey and weren't let out much. I don't know what family they lived with. I didn't have the story worked out quite that good, but I did tell some friends of my parents who were quite confused and asked them later on about, I understand there's a troubled child in New Jersey with, or two. Anyway, that was my only brush with siblings.
And when did you start actually performing in plays? Was it high school or was it after high school?
It was after high school. Yeah, it was after. It was in between high school and college. I started working in the theater and in some television.
Oh, you did? Do you remember your first? Was it an on-screen role?
Yeah.
Do you remember what it was?
I think it was Studio One. Or no, it might have been GE Theater. I only did a handful of them. I did Studio One and GE Theater and one or two other less auspicious shows. And I was a kind of in-between background and 2-3 line stuff. I was in a show, I think the Studio One I did was, I was in some show with Grace Kelly before she was known at all, and I remember being astounded watching her for the sheer blonde beauty of her.
And you were what, 16, 17?
Yeah.
Wow. Now, how did a 16-year-old get cast in a Studio One with Grace
I haven't
Kelly?
a clue how I got the job. I was like every other New Yorker. I was going to offices saying, please hire me because you'll learn to love me. And then sometimes somebody was silly enough to do it. I don't know. I've never seen any of them because those days you didn't see anything you did. And but
It was live television.
It was live, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any impressions or memories of impressions of television when you were very young, when it was first being developed as a medium, and what you watched?
When I first watched television, I was already not very young.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that first Philco set with the weird-shaped screen, which we got, I think, mainly to watch baseball. and I suppose Sid Caesar and Jackie Gleason.
And did that spark of I want to do comedy ever enter into your mind
don't
at that
know.
point? No. Now you went to Dartmouth,
Hmm.
and what did you study at Dartmouth?
I was an English major, but ultimately I had a what they call a senior fellowship to write, which is what I spent a lot of time doing, working on a very long novel that I will give you to read someday just to torture you.
Did anyone else see this novel?
No.
What was your goal for the novel?
My goal was to have this brilliant Faulkner-esque piece win me a prize of some kind.
And it didn't do that, I gather.
I never really finished it.
Still on your plate, next to do.
I have it nearby. I have it in among my books, in a bound thing. It changes its title frequently as I just decide of newer and sillier title for it.
Can you tell us anything about it? What it was about?
No, it was clearly influenced by Faulkner, and it was a kind of, no, I can't.
Okay, mum's the word. We'll read it later.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, at what point did you join the Army, and was that a choice that you made?
No, I was drafted, as was everybody around me. I was understudying John Carr in a play on Broadway called Bernadine, and I was drafted, and that was it for the next 2 years.
Mm-hmm. And you did write and perform in the Army, though, in the theater?
I did. I got really tired of doing an interesting job. I was trained as a helicopter and light aircraft mechanic, which any friend of mine just bursts out laughing when they hear that information. And and assigned to an airfield, a tiny airfield in the south of Germany. An enviable choice, considering that most people were going in the other direction to be slaughtered in Korea, because we weren't very well trained for combat. And so I spent the time, I spent a number of months at this place. A friend of mine was running a company of, sort of a company of actors in Stuttgart, and he was having a lot more fun than I was. So I said, "You get me up there." So I transferred and put together an oddball company of actors, hired some British dancers, and wrote a musical comedy. Wrote the book for a musical comedy, and two guys in the unit wrote the music and the lyrics, and there was a choreographer, and we then toured for the next 9-10 months, doing the show at Army bases and Air Force bases in Germany and England.
Was this a spoof or a...
It was a fabulous, fabulous show called Beyond the Moon, which suggests that accidentally two lowly Army privates find themselves in a rocket to the moon, where they land and are confronted by creatures that look like sort of Martians and beautiful women at the same time. Wildly influenced by Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The plot made no sense whatsoever and was just filled with a lot of jokes and aimless patter, but they liked it a lot. Now I will sing the title song for you for just a moment. It's never been sung on television, and it never will be again, so cherish this moment. I'll find my love beyond the moon and under the stars. Wait there, my love, wherever you are. I'll be there soon, beyond the moon.
Oh, I have to give you an applause for that.
I didn't sing it in the show.
No, that's too bad. That's a loss for them.
Yes.
So, okay, let's go forward a little bit. Now your tenure in the Army ends.
Yep.
2 years was the draft, and then you come back and do what?
I come back and join the other out-of-work actors.
Yeah. In New York. You're in New York still.
Yeah.
Okay, and then at what point do you hook up with Alan Abel and this whole Cinna?
I have no idea what the year was. But you know, when you're out of work.
59 I have.
59?
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose that's reasonable. I batted around. I did a few. What did I do? Junk.
No Time for Sergeants was after the Army?
Yes.
Okay.
No, not all of the touring was after the Army. But No Time for Sergeants was, but I'm not sure what year that was. A lot of things in summer stock. I toured with 3 or 4 shows and then did a half dozen more in the summers usually. But most of the time I was out of work, and I was writing stuff to try and sell. And there were some very nice guys in television who encouraged me but didn't buy anything.
You didn't have any kind of representation at this point?
I had no representation whatsoever. I even, in one dastardly moment, decided I'd take whatever job was next offered me. And the next job that was offered me was a children's theater in North Carolina. It's like when they say, you know, I'm going to fall in love with the next guy who says good morning. Mm-hmm. Basis for many bad movies. Mm-hmm. And this is also the basis for a bad movie. So I flew to North Carolina to join the Saugleen Players, a hardy unit of 4 or 5 actors who also probably spent most of their time out of work. A juvenile, a character actor, an ingenue, a character actress, and 2 people who were mostly drunk, and me. And it was a very, I've saved this story to tell sometime from a stage, but I don't know where that stage will be or what the event will be. Probably something like The Moth, where you have to tell a story, regardless of whether anyone wants to hear it or not. This was a horrible excursion into a kind of demented pretense at being part of the theater. And we did this play that was written by the head of the players. We did a play for the kids, which we would do for schools, which we would do at like 7 and 8 in the morning at assembly. Now, I'm not good at 7 or 8 in the morning. I'm not even good much till 7 or 8 at night. So doing this play, Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp, was not my greatest memory, particularly if you like to imagine me, and I know you do, in a turban-like thing and harem pants. It was ghastly. And at some point in this, I had to kiss the ingenue because I was Sinbad, and she was the princess. And I had just sung, I won't bother you with this one, a piece.
Oh, bother us, please.
Okay, here's what I sang to her on my knees. Princess dear, you are so charming. I think of you till it's alarming. You are my life, my inspiration. I dream of you in desperation. I have prayed to him above me that someday you'd say, how are thee? To grant my wish would make me divinely happy that you spoke to me. Okay, it's subliterate. The music is, of course, from Khachaturian or Rimsky-Korsakov or whoever. And the words were by the head of the theater himself. And he must have written them late at night in a drunken stupor.
Yeah, it didn't sound like from your pen.
And then I had to kiss her. At which point the kids, these were like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds in North Carolina, would throw stuff because they've never seen live, apparent grown people kissing each other for the delectation of a group. And we would have to duck, you know, like a recent president ducked shoes. They would throw anything that was handy and hoot. In the evening, we would play a show for the adults in like the town hall theater or whatever it was. A horribly stupid play that the guy had filched from some book of plays done. I can't believe it was ever on Broadway. It was just such a piece of drivel. But so that was my life. Now, understand we got paid. I think, $40 a week, out of which came room and board. So there wasn't a huge amount left at the end of the week to rent a limo and go to a big party. And then after some months of that, I'd saved up $500. It seems impossible. I can't have saved up $500. I saved up enough to make me decide to hitchhike back to New York, which I did. Oh, we were stuck in a hotel in a snowstorm, in a blizzard. And we couldn't work. And when we didn't work, we didn't get paid. So I saw it dribbling away, and I thought the storm will go on forever. So I went out the back window of the hotel, thus saving a few dollars, and hitchhiked in a blizzard for the next 36 hours, almost dying in the snow one or two times. And that was the end of my my life's worst job.
Yeah, I'd say. So you get to New York probably penniless at this point.
I was pretty penniless,
Your
but I was
parents were
used
living?
to being.
Your parents were still in New York, though.
Yeah.
Did you? So you
I-
went. You
I
went
was-
back there, or?
I was living with two guys I'd been in the Army with. We had an apartment in Greenwich Village, a cold water flat, cost $90 a month, and sometimes other people would come and live there and pay part of it. It was, typical guys in their 20s, not caring that much. I mean, caring about certain things which we had no control over. But New York in the 50s, I mean, you could live on that. You could live on $30 a week if you stole.
Right. Now, was this around the time you joined up with the Premise?
I joined the Premise, I think, in 1960.
Yeah.
And that's the answer to that question.
Yes, it is. I'll ask you a more in-depth question. How did working in the Premise influence you?
How did working in the Premise influence me? I'm not sure how to answer that. It influenced me to the extent that how did it influence me? I don't really know. I mean, I loved working in the Premise.
Well, can you talk about what it was and who else was working?
Okay.
Who else was in
The
it?
Premise was my mind just went for a walk, but it'll be back in a moment. The Premise was an improvisational theater and theater group in Greenwich Village in New York. It operated for 4 or 5 years. It was a cousin, so to speak, to Second City and a number of other groups that came mostly from the Midwest, St. Louis, Chicago. And actually, all of these groups fielded a second team that came to New York in the early 60s. We were just a few blocks from the Second City group, ultimately. And it was a time when improvisational theater kind of got its legs in the country, thanks to a number of people who championed it. And of course, the Premise became, not the Premise so much, but the improvisational groups, starting with Chicago and all that, fed an enormous number of talented people into the theater and into films and television. The group I was with, the Premise was started by a guy named Ted Flicker, who was an itinerant writer, director, actor himself. And it consisted of Ted, George Segal, the actor, as opposed to the sculptor, but I didn't think you really thought it would be the sculptor. George Segal, Joan Darling, who is an actress and a very, very well-known teacher of theater here now, and Tom Aldrich, who has won an endless number of Tonys in New York, as he's like a staple of the New York theater. And who else? Well, then I took Flicker's place. He was sort of the MC of the whole thing, and I took his place and was there until I went someplace else. How did it affect me? I don't know. It made me more confident, I think, in my ability to get from A to B as a writer.
And you were comfortable in that improv
I
setting?
loved doing it immediately. I never regretted a night. We never had a night, no matter how bad, that I didn't think was interesting.
Was there something that you sort of specialized in, or a character that you developed at that time, or it was all
No,
different?
not really. I mean, we all did. If one of us developed an idea or a character, all the others would also use it if they could. In improvisational theater, one of the things you do, well, sometimes you do, is develop a formula for formalizing an idea. In other words, if there's an audience suggestion about foreign policy, something that happened in the world of foreign policy, there are a number of ways to go at it. But I thought of a kind of matrix for it, which is a guy and his dummy, a ventriloquist and his dummy, in which at the end the dummy would get up, fold the ventriloquist up, and walk away. And it was very useful in lots of situations to apply to a particular idea, like who's really running the store. You know, if it were last year, Bush would be the ventriloquist and Cheney would be the dummy, and Cheney would get off Bush's lap and fold Bush up and walk with that. So everybody did that. Everybody invented an idea for using those sorts of things, and I have no idea what question I seem to be answering. But it's basically a writer's,
Well, it was like a device. It was like a...
It's a writer's device, yes. And it I think it maybe helped unlock a way to get at certain ideas. I have no idea what I'm saying.
Actually, it makes quite a bit of sense. I'm curious if this also was when you started. You mentioned that people, I guess, in the audience would throw things out, like a word or a phrase or an event. And was this when you were sort of incorporating current events and parroting and spoofing and satirizing things that were happening?
Yeah.
And was this the first time?
The formula for the premise, which was different from the other improvisational groups. Second City was much more, I don't want to say intellectual, but they were much more culturally bound. They did a lot of stuff at great length, which we would never do. We would try to cut everything off at 5 or 6 minutes at the most. The other groups did a lot more with ideas. What we would do, what was your question?
I think it was was this when you were beginning to play with satire and with current events and spoofing current events?
Yeah, well, the system of the premise was we would do set pieces for the first half of the evening. Mm-hmm. And most of the set pieces were developed out of audience ideas somewhere along the way. And then we'd add something we found interesting into it. And then at the end of the first half, whoever was running the show, in the cases when I was there, I would go and say, now, audience, we're going to leave you for a few minutes, give us a lot of ideas, and give us a movie you like, and give us an opera you want, and give us this and that. We go backstage, we talk about it for a minute or two, and then come back and do the list. And it was mostly all of it was from the news. So all the stuff after that was a sort of, in my career, was somewhat of a continuation of that.
So then now you've answered the first question, which is how it influenced you.
Yeah, there you are.
There you go.
I finally got to something that seems like a sensible answer. Yeah, and you could say that the premise and that part of it led to That Was the Week That Was and SNL and all that stuff.
Right. But now before we go further, I wanted to skip back to something we missed, which was Cinna. Because it's so much fun, and people may not know what it is, so if you could talk about how it came about and then how you perpetuated it.
A friend of mine named Alan Abel, who has been well known for the past number of years as a practical joker on a rather grand scale. He's the one who got women to start fainting on the Phil Donahue show because of overexcitement. He's the one who ostensibly brought some big Middle Eastern leader to New York and, had him go around and confuse people mainly, and with his harem. And he's the one who had his wife ran for president several times as Yetta Bronstein, a Jewish mother who can fix everything. He's the one who, he did loads of stuff like that. Anyway, one day I saw an ad. It probably was a show business paper, like, Showbiz or something. I saw, if you think you can speak intelligently about the role of the dog in society, or drums in the African desert, a series of things that you wouldn't ordinarily be talking about, come to such and such a place and try out for something. I had no idea what it was, but in those days one went and did anything. And so I met with this guy and discussed the role of the dog in society. And then he said, he gathered a few of the more relentless of us, and our little group sat in the show window of a car distributorship somewhere on Upper Broadway and 57th or 8th Street, and we discussed for 3 days and 3 nights, without stopping, in the show windows, the role of the dog in society. It was loudspeakers out in the street, loudspeakered, so people could hear this drivel. And we conducted chemical experiments with like a first-grade chemistry set. I was trying to show something about how the bones of the dog's hind legs are related to human arms. I don't know. And then we'd have guests. People came in and asked if they could sit in, which they did. And one of the most memorable sitters was a guy named Ed Carmelli, who is known as the gentle Jewish giant, mainly famous because of a really famous photograph taken by Diane Arbus about, it's a room with the mother and father of Eddie Carmelli looking up at him as though a creature that they'd never seen before. He was like 8'6", I don't know, or 9 feet tall, and he's on the other side of the room looking down at them. It's a great photograph, very memorable. Anyway, Ed Carmelli was part of it, and I don't know what anyone contributed. It made no sense. But after you talk for 2 or 3 days about something that isn't anything, you get a natural high. It's quite interesting. It's cheaper and possibly better than marijuana. You just get, your brain goes on vacation, and you can speak endlessly, and it was interesting. Anyway, that started the idea of SINA, the Society for Indecency to Naked Animals, which I became the president, G. Clifford Prout, Jr., of the organization, ostensibly from, I think, a St. Louis family that was extremely wealthy, and I was using the inherited wealth to attempt to convince America to clothe both their pets, their domestic pets, and their barnyard animals for a host of reasons, but mostly having to do with indecency and immorality. Practical reasons, too. The high incidence of children, young people, who became traumatized by their contact, and when I say contact, I mean contact, with naked animals and grew up twisted. And the high incidence of automobile accidents on the road near farms and ranches where people got glimpses of naked animals and swerved into trees. And we had charts proving this stuff. So we traveled around the country. We went to a few places to spread this word. Mainly San Francisco, where my quest to close down the San Francisco Zoo on the base of immorality and the burlesque house of the animal world, as I think we referred to it, and other things like that, got us 5 days of front page coverage in the San Francisco Examiner, a newspaper soon, I fear, going out of business. The cosmonauts went up that same week, but we had bigger headlines.
Wow.
As I tried to put a pair of shorts on an elephant, on a baby elephant. I have pictures of it. It's pretty damn dramatic. And it went on like that. And then I once, well, several times I must have said to Alan, where is this going? What are we going to do ultimately? I mean, we had placards and we had membership cards, and I was on the Today Show with Dave Garroway talking about it. This is a good story, but it's slightly obscene, so I'm not going to tell it. No, maybe I should, just so the record can be there forever. Who is it who was on the Garroway Show, the famous woman who still interviews everybody and weeps?
Barbara Walters?
Barbara Walters, yeah. Okay, that's the... So I was on the Garroway Show, the morning show with Garroway and Barbara Walters and a beautiful, now disappeared French starlet named Marlene de Mongeau, staring at me in a kind of puzzled horror as I described what Cinna sought to do. And Garroway, of course, knew it was a ridiculous joke, but he never let on. Barbara looked really perturbed and said, well, you know, Mr. Prout, the thing that occurs to me is that God has already given most creatures, certainly the ones you're talking about, clothes of their own. I mean, they're covered with God-made outfits. They don't need to have human-made outfits. Why? I myself have a great, big, black, hairy, and she paused, at which point the guys on the cameras began to shake. And I could hear them laughing, and I thought, Jesus, where is this going? And she took a breath, and she finally said, Black Labrador at home. But it was too late. The set had dissolved. It was one of my favorite moments. I wish it existed, but I'm sure it doesn't.
Wow.
So I said, Alan, where are we going with this? And he said, I have a plan. I never found out what the plan was. But we did do this all over the place. Then finally it had petered out, and I was leaving Los Angeles, and somebody called and said, would you do an interview at the zoo here? What's the zoo called?
Here?
Yeah.
The Los Angeles County Zoo?
No, the one over in
And
the hills.
Griffith Park?
Griffith Park, yeah.
Is it? Oh, well, the zoo, right.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
He said, would you do an interview with Bob something at the Griffith Park Zoo? I was leaving for New York the next day, driving to New York. And I did this interview. I went out there and talked about the animals and the immorality and the foulness of it all. And I sang the Cinna song. I won't burden you with it at this time.
Oh.
If
You're
you've got a
gonna leave me
ukulele,
hanging? No. We can dub it in later.
I'll think about it. I sang the Cinna song. I had my ukulele with me at the zoo, as I always do. And it was all very moving. So we're going to New York. What I didn't know was that I thought it would be a local piece, because who cares? It actually played on the CBS Evening News.
With Cronkite?
With Cronkite. It was the end piece, the Isn't This a Strange World piece. but it was presented as though we were really what we purported to be. And it apparently has caused a rift to this day between me and the beloved Walter Cronkite, who is my favorite television personality of all time. I mean, you know, he was the great American voice in the media. And it hurts me deeply that he so resented this. It never occurred to me that he or anyone else would believe it. And I'm sorry that it upset him. But I remember one time he told Jane Curtin that I think she was doing him on the show or something, or doing Mrs. Cronkite. I don't know what she was doing, but she got to know Walter, and he said he has a problem with me that he can never get around, or something like that, and I feel really badly about it.
Oh, that's too bad. 'Cause, I mean, really, I mean, what it was obviously there was a different kind of climate at the time. I mean, I guess this was around the time of McCarthyism, or I mean, it was
much later.
It was much later, but it
Yeah.
was the point being that it was a
yeah.
reference to
What was a reference to?
the whole
whom?
Cinna movement.
Well, the whole
was,
thing, no, well, it was, yeah, it was just a parody of uptight, silly morality chasers. But it was so clearly, and if I wish I should have brought the membership cards to show you. They were so ridiculous, with my face in different weird guises. And I was always amazed that some people took it seriously, and they did, because we would have, when I do a television show, there would be, you know, a lot of people saying, "Get this freak out of town, put him in a home," you know, these completely nuts, and defending the animal's rights to be naked, which I liked. And some saying, "Could I have a membership? This is an interesting group. I'd like to know more about it."
I guess, like you were saying, if you talk about anything long enough
Yep.
and you could actually come up with a valid argument for almost anything.
A sort of valid argument.
A sort of valid argument. But it was funny to some, but quite serious to others, which is another theme
Yeah.
that continues. Let's jump to, I'm not sure how this came about that the next job that you had, I believe, was writing for Gary Moore.
No, Steve Allen.
Oh, Steve Allen was before Gary Moore.
Yeah.
So,
I was working in the premise.
right.
Dan Melnick had been the ABC programmer. Let me think about this for a split second. I can't remember. I guess he must have been the ABC programmer. And my college friend Bob Rafelson, later to become the fine director Bob Rafelson, was working for Dan. And he, I think, brought Dan down to the premise to see me. And they were looking for a new cast and writers for yet another Steve Allen show. And that's how I got hired. They may have brought Bill Dana down too.
That's how he remembers it, that
Yeah,
he saw you at the premise.
I think that's so. I think Bill came, and that's so I moved to Los Angeles for a bit.
Right. Now, if we were talking a bit before, could you relate the story of how you acquired a writing partner on the Steve Allen show?
No,
And
I
there's
think
little known about that you worked with Stan Burns.
Well, it's not much for anybody to know. You know, it's not like people are nudging each other on the subway and saying, "Do you realize that Buck Henry worked with Stan?"
But that we were discussing that no one was credited as a team, but that's how you worked
That's
on
true.
the show. So
No,
it's interesting.
I flew to California. I'd never done. I think I'd done a couple of weird. I think I did actually. I did a Cinna moment on. Who was the guy who kids say the darndest things? Had that famous show for years and years. Art Linkletter. I think I did a Cinna bit on Art Linkletter, a strange place to do it because it was the squarest show in the world, but maybe not so strange. So anyway, I came to California to join Steve and his gang, who were, the group he'd assembled was truly an interesting, weird group. The Smothers Brothers, Jim Neighbors, Tim
Conway.
Conway, who was then Tom Conway, and I don't know who else, some others, and a great band. Who was it?
The band?
Yeah,
Oh, God.
it was a really good band. Anyway, then what happened? Where am I?
Oh,
Yeah. So,
How about
so they
Stan?
said, here's the room. Here's the room you can work in, and there's your partner, Stan Burns. I didn't really know who Stan Burns was. I knew vaguely that he'd worked for Steve for years, that he'd been in on the beginning of most of Steve's ideas, of television ideas. And so I went into this room with this big, Stan is a legend now. Who isn't? I walked to this big, smiling, strange-looking, funny guy, and I sat down at a chair across from him at a typewriter on the other side of the room, and we stared at each other for a long time, and then both of us simultaneously blew a spit bubble, and we knew we were fated to be a team. And that was great fun.
Do you remember any specific sketches you wrote or favorite sketches that you worked on that time? I think there was something about the Newton Minnow, the vast wasteland.
Well, the first show we did a huge parody piece on the television hearings in the Senate. The vast wasteland, as Newton Minnow, the chairman of the FCC, had it, and the best thing about, I played David Susskind. I did it, which we used to do in the premise. We would do a David Susskind piece, and it would consist of Susskind and Khrushchev sitting together, and Susskind asking an endless, long, complicated sentence, as Susskind used to do, with all sorts of political things inside it and historical references, at the end of which Khrushchev would stare at him. George Segal played a brilliant Khrushchev, and say, "Avrachi this fortune," and which meant, "I got your nose." It was a kind of non sequitur, but it always worked. I guess there must have been someone playing translator. So we did a version. I did a Susskind thing in that sketch. But the great part of it that I would never have missed is there was a comic that many of you have forgotten named Dayton Allen. Why not? One of the most bizarre and funny men in the business. And Dayton played a parody. He spoke to the committee. He was doing a parody of the kids' show, Captain
Kangaroo?
Kangaroo. He was doing a parody of Captain Kangaroo. In this case, he was called Captain Animal. And he was clearly a person you would not let anywhere near children, not within a mile. He was famous for, among other things, you have to imagine a big black mustache and weird hair and very tall and sort of imperial crazy looking. And he would say, "Hey kids, want to see something swell?" and that alone made us fall to the floor most of the time. Most of the stuff he did you couldn't do in polite society, and yet he was incredibly funny. That caused us trouble. Captain Animal, Kangaroo being so popular and beloved, I'm really not sure why, caused lots of letters and phone calls and telegrams and rocks with notes thrown through the window about how dare we make fun of clearly America's most beloved human being. So there you are. So I knew I was on the right track. The show didn't last very long. It lasted like 12 or 13 weeks. The Smothers were really funny Tim was really funny. Everyone was good on it. I'm not sure about myself. I didn't quite fit in the way I thought I would.
Why do you say that?
I don't know why. I just never felt really comfortable doing the show. And I had idealized it. It's the main television show. I mean, Steve was the one person I wanted to work for because he dealt a lot in language. A lot of his comedy was about words and all this stuff. And it just didn't work as well for me as I thought it would. But I had great fun working with the guys. There were, Bill Dana was our head writer. Everybody loved Bill. Cliche. And later, there were writers on the show who later came and worked for Get Smart. So it was a good group. There was a generation of us that moved out to LA at the same time and worked for the Danny Kaye show, Steve's show, and one other popular TV comedy variety show, and I can't remember what it was. And we were all sort of friends who came from New York and Chicago, Tucker and Mazursky, and we used to hang out a lot together. But anyway, the show ran its course. It just didn't get an audience.
The sketch comedy format, that was something that was comfortable for you coming out of the premise?
Well, yeah, the premise really wasn't sketches. I'm not sure what to call what we did, what name to give what we did, but I don't know why the show just didn't click. It had a lot of talented people on it, but it didn't make the audience happy enough.
Right. Then the next phase then was Gary Moore for you?
Yeah.
And can you talk about how you came to be on that and writing for Gary and writing for his voice?
I actually had an agent, and I think the only agent who ever got me a job in the 60s or any other time, who said Gary Moore's looking for a writer. They lost either Woody Allen or Neil Simon. I can't remember. I think it was Woody. Would you submit some stuff? I said, sure. So I wrote some stuff in what I thought was Gary Moore and Durward Kirby's voice and sent it in, and they hired me. So then that may have been when I drove back to New York after having done the Cine Song in the zoo. I think maybe it was 1961.
61, you were Steve Allen. Moore, I'm not sure what date that was,
Well,
but it was probably 62.
It could have been 61 or 62 because Steve's show went in the same year it started. Anyway, so I went to New York and took up, my new job. We had offices. Gary had his offices in what is now a huge hotel on 57th and 9th, and now I can't remember what it was called. A gigantic building in which there was like a YMCA, a huge pool and other things and all sorts of stuff going on, and led a whole different kind of life for a year or two. I was sort of the parody specialist. I would always do the movies on That Was the Year That Was. And I also did a lot of the sort of meaningless, silly dialogues between Gary and Durward Kirby. They were awfully nice to work for. They were really good guys who ran that show. And there was the head of the, what do they call him? It wasn't a story editor, it was a script editor. What was he? The head writer was a guy named Vinnie Bogart. And the ideal for everyone was to make Vinnie laugh. If you could make Vinnie laugh, you could be very happy. And Joe Hamilton was the producer, Carol Burnett's husband. And all really amiable people. Anyway, I made Vinnie laugh. And it was one of the happiest moments of my life. He was just this kind of, he was very nice, but he was very serious and sort of dour, and he would look at the stuff like a scientist looking through a microscope at the material. And it was, I liked it. It was good. I wasn't, what am I trying to say? I spent most of my time in these inside offices, inside other inside offices, in the Edison Hotel. And then we did the show on in the Ed Sullivan Theater, now the Dave Letterman Theater. And does he stay there or does he go somewhere else? I can't remember.
On 53rd?
Yeah.
Broadway and 50, yeah.
And it was a nice theater to work in. And we'd spend a day there, a day of rehearsal, and the show day.
Do you remember what it was that made Vinnie Bogart laugh? Do you remember the
I
sketch
do,
at all?
but it was too humiliating.
Oh, come now.
It was that was the year that was, and the sketch was a parody of The Good Earth. And the actors were, George Gobel as the Chinese head of the canton or whatever it was, and Dorothy Loudon as this, just them as a Chinese couple is good. In their house, and this isn't going to sound like much now, and he's looking out, and she's saying things like, it rained blood, and then the snows came and everything flooded. We didn't eat that year, and then there was the earthquake, and the thing fell down, and that was the fourth year we didn't eat. I think it's all happened. Nothing else. And of course, he turns from the window and he says, "Does the word locusts mean anything?" And it made Vinnie laugh and made me very happy. And I had a good time on that show, even though it was considered really corny. And Gary Moore was a wonderful man. I'll tell you a story. Here's the story. We went to California to do a few weeks somewhere, Lake Tahoe, I think, and maybe Las Vegas. I don't know. And while we were there, an article in Life magazine came out, a show business article excoriating us, the writers for the Gary Moore Show, for our lax and lame work. They may have been right. I don't know. But Gary sent us all a note. He was the least show-offy person in the world. He sent us a note saying, "Carol and I think that you guys have done fabulous stuff this year," with a week's salary in every note, with every note. A little bonus to show us that. And I don't know, can't remember anyone else doing anything like that. So that was all good. And then I can't remember, the pilot for That Was the Week That Was came in there somewhere, because I was around working on the pilot, but not on the first year. So I guess the pilot was done a while before they actually did the first year. But you didn't ask me that.
Not yet, but that's a good point. We're about to run out of